Good day, students. Our lesson on English grammar today would be on what's the point of punctuation. By the end of today's lesson, you would be able to understand the relevance and importance of punctuation in writing. So what's the point? Let's start our lesson by answering these questions with a partner. Why do I need to punctuate? Or why do I need to use punctuation? What's all the fuss about it? Can you explain the point of punctuation? Why? So try to ponder for a moment or two on these reasons. Why do you think we need to use, or what is the point of punctuation? Moving on. What are punctuations? Punctuations are like the road signs of language. Now, what are road signs? When you drive a car, when you come to a traffic light, you are required to stop. So there will be three lights, red, amber, and green. So each with its own meaning. So the red means stop, amber means or orange, getting ready to stop, and green is to go. So you would also sometimes see signs like no parking, okay, or no entry. These are all road signs that we see on the streets. Now, for a language, we also use or we also have road signs, and that's what punctuations are all about. Okay, they help to make things clear, they direct a piece of writing, they add a tone and a shape to the words. Okay, so with that, let's move on to see some examples of punctuation. One of the most common ones that you have seen, and even popular ones, is actually a question mark. A question mark means it is a question, it denotes a question. When you have a question mark, it means you need an answer to accompany it back. Okay? So there is a question and there is an answer. So if a sentence has a question mark, it means it's asking something. It denotes a question. So we end that sentence with a question mark. Next would be a comma. Now, what is a comma? A comma separates items in a list or phrases. My mother went to the market and bought some bananas, papayas, broccolis, mangoes, and oranges. So you use that comma to separate items on a list in a sentence. The last one, of course, has to end with a full stop. Clear? Moving on, you have something called the exclamation mark. What does this do? It shows or it has the element of surprise, humor, or even anger. So this is an emotional kind of a mark. Okay, it can be a surprise, it can be something funny, or it can also be something angry, and you want to show that emotion in that sentence, so you use an exclamation mark. Okay, so these are just some of the examples. The next one would be a semicolon. What does this do? It separates the items in a detailed list and joins linked independent clauses within a sentence. For example, when you have this semicolon, then you can put in other or as many other items, okay, within a sentence. And then you can end it as well with a full stop. Next would be an apostrophe. An apostrophe. It shows the omission of letters in a shortened word and denotes ownership. Okay, some example would be, for example, she will. So I can shorten this to become she'll. She will do it. Okay, or we will. So you can shorten it to become will with an apostrophe, and you join with the two last words we'll do it. Okay, what if it's we will not? Okay, the word will not. If I shorten this, it will become won't. So W-O-N with apostrophe T. It'll become won't. This is where you use apostrophe. It shows the omission of letters. You want to shorten it. Okay? Now let's look at more examples. Colon. Okay? A colon can introduce a list, example, or explanation of something. Okay? So this is how you use a colon. Next would be ellipsis. Now, ellipsis leaves an idea unfinished or creates a pause. This builds suspense for the reader. Now, for example, she went to the cave, or she would say she entered the cave. Okay? She entered the cave and ellipsis. Now, this sentence, if you leave it like an if you leave it in such a way, then it builds some kind of suspense for the person who is reading it. She entered the cave and so what happens next? Okay, so let's move on. Sorry. A hyphen. A hyphen joins two words to make one word. Okay. A very common one would be, for example, numbers. When you use numbers 21, okay, 21, you join it with a hyphen. Sometimes there can be other words as well. So what else do we have? We have brackets and dashes. They are used to enclose extra detail or information within a sentence. Brackets must always be used as a pair. So remember, you open a bracket, you close a bracket. But a dash can be used alone at the end of a sentence. That's not a problem. Now let's move on. Speech marks. Now, what are speech marks? Speech marks show the actual words spoken by a person or character. So for sometimes when you're reading a story or a novel, it opens with a speech mark, okay? And it says, I will not be joining your party. Close the speech mark. It has to have an opening and a closing. Okay. Said John. It would come something like that. It would look something like that. So what does this mean? John actually said these words. I will not be joining your party, said John. I will not be joining your party, said John. So these words inside the speech marks show the actual words spoken by this character called John. Okay. Let's clear this. Moving on. Full stop. Now, of course, we all are very familiar with this, but sometimes we miss this out. So it denotes the end of a sentence. Every sentence needs to have a full stop. Okay? So sometimes we can use a double quotation marks or single quotation marks when we are quoting a text. Although there is no set rule, we tend to use double quotation marks if the part of the text we are quoting contains a direct speech from a character. Some people will go one step further and use both together. Okay, so please, sir, I want some more. It's also an example. So if your quotation contains both direct speech and the narrator's own words, you may find that single quotation marks will be enough. Okay? Good knowledge of punctuation marks and the purpose of them. What's the purpose of punctuation? As I told you, it shows us they are like the road signs of a language. So the question would be, what happens if I don't use any punctuation? So here, if you use a punctuation, it says that it helps you to understand the text, it improves your writing, and without punctuation, it would be unstructured, muddled, meaningless. It's difficult to make sense. Let's look at an example, and I would like you to try. We'll just do one paragraph. They were sitting on some steps in the Uffizi arcade. He must have carried her. He rose when she spoke and began to dust his knees. She repeated, "Oh, what have I done? You fainted. I am very sorry," and so on. If you noticed, there was the understanding of that paragraph was pretty difficult, was pretty challenging. Now, what happens if we use the proper punctuation? They were sitting on some steps in the Uffizi arcade. Notice how my tone dropped down. Okay? They were sitting on some steps in the Uffizi arcade. It drops down. It's like the volume goes, the tone goes up and comes down at a full stop. He must have carried her. Again, goes up, comes down and stops. He rose when she spoke and began to dust his knees. So there is a comma here. If you notice carefully, he rose when she spoke and began to dust his knees. There is a little pause, but it's not a full stop. That's a comma. She repeated, "Oh, what have I done?" This is an opening for a dialogue. Okay. So what have I done? A question mark. You fainted. I, I am very sorry. How are you now? You see that? So notice how punctuation also means that the writing is split into new lines for speech. So every time someone speaks something, you put it into a new line. You do not continue like a paragraph. Okay? So these are little things that you should take into concern when you are learning your punctuation, especially when you're going to write essays. So with that, end the lesson on punctuation.